I'm assuming. I didn't hear otherwise. Hi, my name's Hannah. I'm here on behalf of Lesbos, which, if you're not familiar with it, it's a local lesbian newsletter here in Boston. And we're trying to do more intergenerational things like this, kind of getting lesbians of all ages in the same space to kind of talk and hear more about local history. So we're going to get right into that. We're joined here by Rochelle and Annie. We're going to do a quick, thank you so much, Q&A with them, and then it'll kind of open up to the floor. A couple of things about what's in front of you. We have there's a little background info about the takeover. That's like the black and white printout. And then if you're a note taker, I'm kind of a note taker, I'm a doodler, so that's what the blank notebooks and the pens are for. Yeah, and then there's also a booklet about Mary Leno, who was a really prominent figure here in the Cambridge community, who recently passed away, so you can kind of read more about Mary and her work. And if you have any questions about Mary, if you want to know more about her, there are people really willing and excited to talk about her, so if you have any questions. Also, our friend Ro is going to be here taking photos, just more for like archival purposes. It's fun to do things like this, but if you would not like to be photographed, feel free to kind of like let me know, let Ro know, email me after, like not gonna put anyone's face on blast, so. All right, without further ado, I'm just gonna give a little bit of background on what we're here to talk about tonight, which is the takeover of 888 Memorial Drive. So, yeah. So that happened back on International Women's Day in 1971. Hundreds of women marched from the Boston Common to 888 Memorial Drive, which was an underutilized Harvard-owned building, which they occupied for 10 whole days, demanding dedicated women's spaces in the city. This was a super bold action, as you can imagine, that went on to inspire feminist movements across the country. So inside the building during the takeover, women brought sleeping bags and food, and they set up camp working together to protect the space and support one another. They held self-defense classes, dance parties, strategy meetings, and they just kind of kept the movement energized. So outside, more women gathered in solidarity while police were called in, and as you can imagine, the occupation drew a lot of public attention. Some men organized protests, classic, and news outlets arrived to kind of cover the story. So the sit-in ultimately led to a $5,000 donation from Susan Lyman, which is about $30,000 today. And that money allowed them to put a down payment on the house on 46 Pleasant Street in Cambridge. Yeah, which, if you don't know, is still the Cambridge Women's Center today. So yeah. Fun fact, the Cambridge Women's Center is the oldest continuous running women's center in the United States. And they have all kinds of great programming. And Rochelle and Annie here were one of the many lesbians who took part in this takeover. And so they're here to chat more about the takeover as well as modern forms of resistance. And Rochelle was the executive producer of Left on Pearl. If anyone had a chance to watch, the documentary about the takeover. If you haven't had a chance to watch yet, don't stay up too late, but it's on YouTube for free, and I'll remind you later. But yeah, thank you so much to Rochelle and Annie for being here. Okay, so could you first share a bit more about your life at the time of the takeover in 1971?
First of all, I want to say I'm very inspired by seeing so many young people here, and some of us old fogies too, but it's great to see the next generation and the next generation here and interested in what we have done in the past, and now it's your turn. So anyway, I'm very inspired. So yeah, I had actually been married to a man in the 1960s, and then we split up, and I spent the last year of the 60s in Berkeley, California, which was the perfect place to be. The first time I went to Berkeley, I got tear gassed. We went to a movie. And I split up with my husband and got involved in the women's movement, and I really feel like the women's movement saved my life, because suddenly I understood why I was feeling like, oh, I had to be married to a man, and if I didn't stay married to a man, I was gonna be a failure, and just really began to understand all the social pressures on me and other women to act in a certain way and to be subservient and to subsume our desires for that of whoever the man was we were connected to. So anyway, I came to Boston in 1969 to teach at a Catholic women's college, which doesn't exist anymore, Cardinal Cushing College, and got very involved in the women's movement. There were all kinds of, it was a very time of great ferment. There were meetings of Bread and Roses. There were meetings of female liberation. I kind of got involved with both. I took karate classes through female liberation and went to a lot of, there were of course a lot of meetings. We had to have meetings. And I went to a lot of Bread and Roses meetings. And what was great was that at Bread and Roses, you could think of an action and get people to go along with you. So one of the first things that I got involved with was WBCN, Charles Laquadera, who was then the DJ, made an announcement on the radio about how I think it was Project Place, needed volunteers, and if you're a chick and can type, they want you. And we decided, a bunch of us, we were gonna show them who real chicks were. And so we actually ordered chicks from, and we went to WBCN with, I think on Valentine's Day, I'm not sure, with the chicks and said, these are chicks, we're not chicks, and we want an hour of airtime, and we want you to hire female DJs. And they were completely flabbergasted, but they gave us an hour of airtime, and we put it together at the MIT radio station and put it on the air, and eventually they did hire some women DJs. So this is the kind of stuff that we just spontaneously were doing at that time. And the takeover of 888 was not so spontaneous. It was very well planned. There were basically two groups, as if you've seen the movie, you've seen that. The group that was planning the demonstration, which I was really part of, and the group that was planning the takeover, which I thought was a bad idea, which is why I wound up making a movie about it. Again, there were, it was a time when people were up for trying bold action. I'm not trying to say we shouldn't do bold actions now. I mean, they would be different. But that was really the background for the march, which took a lot of planning. And I should also say International Women's Day is an American holiday. It started, even though it's not celebrated here, it's celebrated every place else except here. But it was actually started by the US Socialist Party in 1908, around 1908, as a result of a whole bunch of strikes and marches in New York City. And the US Socialist Party then declared a National Women's Day. And then that kind of percolated to Europe, and in August 26th of all days, 1910, in Copenhagen, the Second Socialist Women's Congress, they proclaimed International Women's Day. And it actually, the first goal of it was women's suffrage. And from there, it kind of spread, and you may or may not know, but the Russian Revolution, the first part of the Russian Revolution in 1917, which toppled the Tsar, actually took place on International Women's Day. And Trotsky writes in his memoir, Leon Trotsky, who was one of the Bolshevik leaders, that we told the women not to go on strike on International Women's Day, and they disobeyed us. So disobedient women is also, I guess, a theme. But anyway, I'll stop talking. Maybe Annie.
Stop talking, I'm ready to go. Continue.
No, that's it. So this is the history of International Women's Day. And so then we had our march in 1971, and we had a surprise ending, which was the takeover of this building. And just one other thing, which is the police, we completely confounded the police because all the demonstrations would start in Boston and then go across the bridge and go into Harvard Square. But we screwed them up because we turned left on Pearl. They had no idea what the hell we were doing. They just thought they were going to mass in Harvard Square and get us, but we got them.
That's awesome. Yeah, no, and great context as well, I think, for the movement as well. So you said that, or you believed that the takeover was a bad idea, but then you were there, you spent nights at the takeover, and you were part of the self-defense brigade. Could you talk more about like what your daytime versus your nighttime looked like?
Well, I mean, we trained. I had been taking karate already, and I mean, which was another just totally liberating thing to feel that I could learn how to defend myself, which, by the way, now, somebody has got to figure out how to trip over an ICE agent, because they love to throw women to the ground. If you see all these movies, the films, the videos of ICE agents, they're always throwing, particularly women, to the ground, and they get a big kick out of it. And we have to figure out, there must be an Aikido trick or something where you can trip them so that they fall to the ground. And, you know, I wish I could figure out how to do that, but somebody will. And I have visions of it.
It's nice to dream, I think, yeah.
So anyway, yeah, so we did self-defense. We had already begun to do it before then. And female liberation, as I say, was particularly, that was one of the things that they emphasized. And Jane West had a women's karate class that she started and that she held. And in any case, yes, we did do self-defense in the building. And I remember also, I don't know why we were doing this, sawing off broom handles with other, now I don't know if we thought we were going to fly out of the building or what, but we had a whole bunch of broom handles somewhere in there. So.
Yeah, that's awesome. In the documentary Left on Pearl, some women recall having their first lesbian sexual experiences during the takeover, as well as a lesbian dance party and lesbians giving out free haircuts en masse. What did the lesbian community look like outside of 888 Memorial Drive at the time?
Well, I mean, it was amazing. It was kind of like trees falling in the forest, except we did see them. Because every day, I remember at that point, almost every week somebody else was coming out. Or more than one person was coming out. So we really had a community. And it was, when the Women's Center opened, it was very much very visible lesbian community there. But one of the things we wanted to say in the film and point out in the film was the role of lesbians in the whole takeover, the demonstration and the takeover, and the visibility of lesbians. It's not like everybody in the building was a lesbian, but the lesbian presence was very, very strong. And again, you know, there, as you see from the film, there were people in the second wave feminist movement who really wanted to play down the role of lesbians, like Betty Friedan, for one, and who talked about the Lavender Menace and all of that, and thought if the world knew that lesbians were such a big part of the second wave movement, that would make somehow us less legitimate. And so again, as I say, we wanted to show the visibility of lesbians in this action, and proud lesbians. We weren't hiding the fact that we were lesbians. Yeah.
That sounds awesome. That sounds like a dream. Could you talk more about the energy inside the building? I know it was cold. I know you're sleeping on the ground, but I assume there's also like a great deal of kind of excitement and kind of, you know, not knowing what the next day was going to look like.
Yeah, I mean, there was excitement, there was fear because we didn't know what was going to happen. Of course, because it was a movement activity, there were many meetings. Many meetings. But yes, it was very emblematic of the time. There was a lot of, one of the things that we wanted to do in the movie, but we just couldn't get the rights to it, was play Janis Joplin songs. Because there were all kinds of, there was a lot of great music, and one of the things I really remember are the Janis Joplin songs, but the process of getting rights for songs like that is just way too expensive, and so we had to, unfortunately. But yeah, there was a lot of great music. There was a lot of brown rice. There was a lot of there were a lot of discussions. We brought in the kids. We had kids parties. We had dance parties. Yeah, I mean, it was very vibrant, very lively, and you know, I mean, who had really had a women's center before this? We were sort of. I mean, there had been kind of Jane Addams, there had been sort of settlement houses and things like that, but nothing like a kind of women's center before. So we were very much trotting new ground in doing this, so yeah.
Yeah, and definitely kind of making a space like you're imagining, like it's kind of like a radical thing to imagine, but then also like a very practical need, I feel like, to have a space like that. So I was wondering in which ways you see spaces like the Women's Center still being essential today.
Do you want to say something?
No, go ahead.
No, I mean, I want to point out, and it's kind of gone under the radar, that even though Harvard hasn't officially capitulated yet, and I hope they don't, they have closed their Women's Center. And of course they've also closed all the DEI initiatives, and anything that says DEI, they've closed that, and they've renamed it. But the Women's Center, one of the great things about the Women's Center in Cambridge is that it's independent, it's independently funded, and so it's not, I mean, it's not dependent on federal funding to keep going, and that's really very, very important at this point. And we're very lucky at the Women's Center that somebody with deep pockets rehabbed the whole place 2 years ago. Like, took a year, took it down to the studs practically, and rebuilt it and donated the rehab completely, as far as I know, and put in an elevator, put in accessible bathrooms and all of that. So we have been very lucky to get people with deep pockets to contribute. But again, you know, the fact that Harvard could close their Women's Center just shows how important what we have done is.
Yeah, completely. And so the takeover ends, the Women's Center is established, but it's not exactly like an instant hurrah moment. I was wondering if you could talk more about kind of like the community response to the community center at first, and kind of, I remember you talking more about like some hardships, like trying to enter the building and just kind of some animosity from people in the neighborhood.
Yeah, I mean,
Right.
in the beginning we basically had to run a gauntlet of neighborhood boys, including friends of the people who lived next door to the Women's Center, who would scream "dyke," who threw eggs at the building, and the thing that the most serious thing they did was they set fire to the building. And this is the unintentional consequences of actions like this. Because they set fire to the building, and we were having trouble paying the mortgage in the beginning, even though the price of the house was $27,000, which is hard to believe at this point, because you couldn't even get a closet in Cambridge for that right now. But because the boys set fire to the building, we were able to get an insurance settlement, which basically paid the mortgage for about 2 years. So, go figure.
And so you mentioned that you and Annie used to sleep at the Women's Center at night, kind of to protect it from things like that. Did it feel at the time like really obvious the kind of personal sacrifices you were making for this community space, or did it just kind of feel like the obvious thing to do?
No, go.
I mean, it was, it just felt like we really had to do that to we were very committed to keeping the center going and not letting the boys, I mean, there were two groups. There were the boys outside screaming, and then actually I saw the power of mental illness, unfortunately, because for a while we had a woman who was catatonic who was standing in the second floor in one of the rooms for days. And at one point, one of the boys broke into the building, which they would do. They'd break through the front door. He ran up the stairs. He ran into that room where the catatonic woman was, and he was out of the building faster than I've ever seen. Not that I'm recommending being catatonic, but yeah, that was that. And then there were, within our own community, people who said you can't own private property, the community is against you. And what did they mean by the community? Was it the boys, or was it other people in the community? And it was not at all clear. But we managed to, after many, many meetings, decide to keep the building. And eventually the boys receded. And actually, the people who worked on the rehab, when it was done, we had a big party. And there were a lot of older men there who had worked on rehabbing the building. And I thought, I wonder if they're the sons or grandsons of the guys who were standing outside yelling at us. But they were so nice, and it was like, just really, really very happy that they had done this. So things have changed.
Of course. Annie, did you want to share anything about?
I was just going to say that it was a bumpy ride in the beginning, and some of that bumpiness came from within our own women's community, where people would say things like, this place is an albatross around our neck, we should just close it. In other words, there was a struggle, and maybe they couldn't see the way forward with it. And did we all necessarily know? I mean, when she talks about how we slept there, other people would take turns just covering the place. Maybe we weren't there either at night, but we wanted to make sure there were always women who were watching out. And that was partly because of the women who would come there who really needed help, a lot of help. And so somebody had to be on hand to feel that. And as we haven't even mentioned this when we've talked about different groups, but as a result of the need there, this has been the very beginning, an emotional counseling group developed, and some of the people were already had some training, but it was an evolving thing to help people who needed it and to find a way.
I think now with when you think about different women's issues or things that come up, I can think of hotlines I can call and places that I could go to, but I feel like you guys are in way more uncharted territory, establishing those kinds of resources.
In terms of being focused on women's needs and seeing that, private place existed at that time, other places did, but not necessarily focused on women's needs. Plus, they were all overwhelmed. There were trained people in those places, but they were all just straight out from the perspective.
Yeah, no, I mean, when you think about all the groups that came out of the Women's Center, one of them being Transition House, again, because women who were victims of violence in their homes needed a place to be. The Rape Crisis Center, emotional counseling, but also I want to say we were so naive, because I remember that I think it was actually the first person who knocked on the door of the Women's Center after we opened said she had been referred from Cambridge Mental Health, from the emergency room at Cambridge Hospital, had been referred to us. And I thought, oh great, now we can teach her about the social origins of mental illness. We were so naive.
Very hopeful, very wide, but
Wide-eyed a little, yeah.
But then, I mean, really, and Elizabeth Stonehouse came out. I mean, just all these groups which now are considered so much a part of the whole kind of helping community came out of the Women's Center. And the Women's School.
Yeah. Could you talk more about the women's school as well, the kind of classes that you offered?
Yeah, I mean, the Women's School had a couple of iterations, and Mary Lena was involved a little bit later, but there were classes in women in Marxism, there were classes about violence against women, women in the economy, just a whole range, self-defense, fixing your car. We were in uncharted territory in a way. And the women's school was at the Women's Center for a while, then it moved down the street, and then it came back again. But I think it lasted through most of the 70s.
And 80s into 90s.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, and it's cool to think about, because it was just community members that would kind of take on the role of like teaching and kind of attend.
Yeah. Well, Kathy, you probably know more about it.
It was entirely volunteer, and some of the early classes were also women's history at a time when there was no women's history. And it was kind of an orientation, a place for women who could just come to town and take a class for 8 weeks and pay $5 and do a night of childcare in somebody's home. But it was a collective of women who carried it on and on and on.
And right, I mean, there was a socialist feminism class, there was a lesbian liberation, lesbian history class, yeah.
Is there anything else from that like period of kind of like Boston or Cambridge lesbian feminist history that you wish people knew more about, or you feel like kind of gets lost?
Well, I mean, I think that, you know, the way in which this was a real, I'm not trying to say that it's not the case now, but it was, the Women's Center in particular was a community, and there were also other places for lesbians to socialize. There were a number of lesbian bars at that point. There was a whole women's music scene. So there was a real sense of being part of this. It was, I would say, Cambridge-centered community. Yeah. And I'm sure people here could say a lot more about that.
Totally, we'll definitely
Yeah.
open the floor up in a sec to that.
Yeah.
If younger activists were kind of looking to organize something as bold as the takeover, or even to just kind of like further organize community similar to what you feel was present in your time here, what advice would you give them?
I think, you know, every generation, resistance comes in many forms. I mean, I just wrote this because I can't, every day there's some new horror, and my way of dealing with it is to write poems. But it's not clear what is the best way of resisting at this point, because we are in the midst of, unfortunately, an extremely long backlash. And I think we shouldn't give up. This will end. I'm a historian, so I know these things end. And we have to not only resist now in a whole bunch of different ways, but really think about what we want for the future. Because this is all postponing the fact, aside from the fact that one could say we are a declining nation and this is dying capitalism or some late stage capitalism. We need to think about what we want, what we envision for our country. And it's very clear that we have to move to become a social welfare state and make sure that whatever reforms we put into place, or not even reforms, just kind of reorganization of the system, can be made in a way that they can't be overturned the way they have been now. And this is really 100-year, it seems to me, backlash from the time that Roosevelt started the New Deal and really re-envisioned what government could be. And you know, Mellon, who just gave the money, I call it a psychological disorder when a billionaire funds an essential government function. You could call it melancholy. But we have to. These are families that have been anti-FDR. I mean, we were anti the New Deal from the beginning. So we really have to re-envision what we want our nation to be like. So resistance will take many forms, including figuring out how to throw ICE agents down to the ground.
Before we opened everything up to the floor for some more questions, I wanted to pick at some things more anecdotally that we were chatting about before. First of all, how you two met. It would be awesome to hear if you wanted to share more about that. Or
It seems to be a minor part of everything, but I met Rochelle at her commune's Halloween party. Oh, sorry. I met Rochelle at her commune's Halloween party. And I hadn't been in Boston very long, I guess, since the spring, I guess.
And could you share more about how the commune was set up or what that looked like? That was a little...
Yeah, and again, I mean, we were like, we decided to get rid of individual spaces, so nobody had their own room. We lived in a house in Somerville, right across from, right off of Beacon Street. And we decided to make spaces communal spaces, so there was a sleeping room. There were 2 sleeping rooms. There were 7 of us. There was an eating room, of course. There was a sex room, and there was a library, I think. And we lived like that for 2 or 3 years. Yeah, maybe even more than that. Yeah.
So if it was a Halloween party, you guys are kind of coming up on your anniversary of meeting, right? Yeah?
Yeah.
It was a really long time ago, a lot of changes.
Yeah.
Well, Annie doesn't want me to say this, but one of the first things she said to me was, "You're just a political lesbian, not a real lesbian. not a dyke."
Has your opinion changed since then? Has Rochelle proven herself?
Probably.
Yeah, I think so.
Well, I was going to say, if anyone else had any questions from the audience, I'm happy to kind of pass around this mic, or if you want to like project.
I just want
yeah,
to
go
say,
ahead.
yeah, so the other thing that happened was in the middle of being in this women's commune, I said, I want to have a kid. And one of the other women in the commune said, "You can't have your cake and eat it too." But I proved her wrong.
It took a little while, but she did.
And you mentioned someone got kicked out for being too bourgeois. What was that?
Well, so my friend who, we sort of live parallel lives because we're both Russian historians, and I do like through 1917 and she does after 1917. And she was living in the same house, which became a Marxist-Leninist commune 10 years later, and she was thrown out for being too bourgeois. So.
That's awesome. Yeah. I actually had one question over here, I think, first, and then we could, yeah. Did you want to try to make? I don't know if it screens will.
How are we? Okay. First, I want to say thank you both so much for coming and speaking with us today. And second, I want to ask, beyond Janis Joplin, what kind of music were you listening to during this?
That's a good question.
Laura Nero.
Women's Liberation Rock Band?
To be honest with you, Creedence Clearwater Revival. I mean, let's see.
Oh, just the Women's Liberation Rock Band.
Yeah, yes. Oh, that was another thing. I mean, there was, right, a lot of women's music. Meg Christian, Holly Near, Chris Williamson, and Bob Dylan, of course, the Beatles. Yeah, the usual.
Terrific, thank you.
We can put a playlist together, maybe.
Thank you. Oh, great, you can hear me through the mask. This might not be the right crowd to ask, but what did intersectionality look like at the time for you guys?
That's a very good question, and that because it was at that point a white group, but there were, I think, when it's said that it was entirely white, that's wrong. There were women of color in the building. Florence Kennedy actually came from New York to the building and came into the building. Gloria Steinem didn't come into the building. She stood outside and didn't go in. It was a big issue, however, what was wasn't called intersectionality at that point, but the whole issue of race, the issues of class, were very, very much central to what our discussions were about. And what was interesting to me is that we really the movie is really a story of two movements. One is the movement of taking over the building, and the other is the actions of the women in the community who were, a large part of whom were African American and who were led by these very strong African American women like Sandra Graham. And the two stories come together in the building, and then afterwards with the fight for affordable housing and against the Harvard expansion afterwards. But what didn't happen after the takeover was a connection between the two groups. And that took a long time before. I think now the Women's Center is much, much more diverse than it was for the first couple of years. We did, however, the Women's Center is where the Combahee River Collective met from 1975 to 1981. Does everybody know the Black Feminist Collective, which began meeting at the Women's Center and then met there for a number of years. But yes, it was not only intersectionality in terms of race and class, but then as trans people began to come to the Women's Center, that was an issue that we had long discussions about that, and the upshot of those discussions was that anybody who identified as a woman was welcome at the Women's Center. So I don't know if that answers your question.
No, it does. I already missed the name of the feminist group. The river organization you were talking about. What was the name of that again?
Yeah, the Combahee River Collective. I'm going to spell it Combahee. Oh my God, you won.
And it's named after, I don't know if everybody knows, but Harriet Tubman in the middle of the Civil War, 1863, actually led this incredible action where I think it was several hundred slaves were freed as a result. And she kind of essentially organized this military action, essentially, and freed these slaves. And that's where the Combahee River Collective got its name from.
She was part of the army.
She was a military spy for the Union. Yep.
Yeah.
Yeah, and if anyone else is not familiar with the Combahee River Collective, awesome. We're kind of a huge flex of the Cambridge Women's Center to have had their meetings there. I'm not gonna lie. But yeah, a really seminal writings of looking at the two movements at the time and looking at the unique spots of different people. So really cool. Did anyone else?
Hi, thank you. I had a question about the role of fear. In the documentary, you talked about there was different times where you thought the police could come in at any moment, and there was a lot of fears for physical safety, but you didn't really go into people being scared about their jobs or other types of repercussions. So I think I'm just curious, especially today, I feel like that is sometimes a convenient excuse, but also I think fear is rightfully heightened right now for facing losing jobs or getting kicked out of school. Obviously, at the time, I think relationships with family were could have been already diminished because of coming out. So I'm curious about the fear of repercussions and how you helped yourself through that, and maybe how that relates to the current moment.
When you ask the question, I kind of look back on that time and think of it as a more innocent time. It's not that there wasn't resistance from families or whatever, but there was room to explore. I don't know how to say it, but maybe the backlash hadn't started and didn't start for a while. It was early enough so that we were less of a threat. Us crazy dykes that were out in the street and all we were able to weave in among, and it was just, innocence is one word. There's other.
Actually, it's amazing that there were very few consequences to the takeover. A couple of people were called in a couple of Harvard students were called in to the various administrators' offices, but nobody really got prosecuted. And I was teaching at Cardinal Cushing College then, and I would go home and change into my combat boots and my jeans and whatever, and go over from my mini skirt and go over to the building, and I never had any consequence from being involved in that. So I don't. However, we right before our takeover, there was a takeover in New York City, right around New Year's of 1970-71, and the women in that building, they also took over what was kind of an empty building across from the police station, a police station in New York City. And at the end of their takeover, which was also about 10 days, they made an arrangement with the police to leave the building. And it was, they got press for that and all of that, but their building, unlike 888 was open, but their building had a courtyard. And some women left, okay, without a problem. But then the police blocked off the courtyard and went in and beat up women. And that's not well known. It's not as well known as what happened with our takeover, where we were able to leave the building. I mean, I think if we had stayed longer, it's not clear what would have happened. But it's amazing actually to think now about the consequences. I also want to say that we lived, our economic situation was different from now. When I started college, I paid $9 a credit. So I was able to get a scholarship that paid, because my parents said, you have to go to secretarial school, we can't afford. So I wasn't going to do that. But you could do that. You could work for a summer and pay your whole tuition. And it's just not possible now. And a lot of students are, indebted for years, as we know, with student loans. Tuition is way, way out of line, or just very expensive. And we also lived in Somerville in a 2-bedroom apartment for $125 a month rent. Again, it's like, so I think that, there's not enough attention paid to the way that economic situations, the kinds of advances we've made have been mostly individual. I benefited from same-sex marriage, but economic, so what seems to have been gone forward are things connected with individual rights, but not collective economic rights. That it really hasn't changed, and if anything, it's gotten worse. So I think that it's harder now, because if you have a job and you have student loan debts, then you might be more reluctant to put yourself out. And I think Annie is right, that we maybe were naive. It was a different time. But I don't think there was the same fear that there might be now for sticking your neck out.
I just wanted you to talk about the context of, this was at the time that the Vietnam War and all the protests were going on with that, and there was a lot of brutality, that Harvard bashing of the student. I mean, a lot was going on, and also to say that when we brought the film to the MIT group, and we talked about it, and they were doing the Palestine resistance, and there was genuine fear about, in today's world, what's going to happen.
Right. Right. I mean, there's been a tremendous suppression of student protest of any kind, and again, the kind of weaponizing of anti-Semitism and the suppression of pro-Palestinian, demonstrations. Yeah.
I want to say, I don't think you guys were naive. I don't think it was until 1981 that Reagan's administration sought to go after an educated class by calling us an educated proletariat. So like the rapid decline of accessibility of education, especially post Clinton administration, isn't really something anybody would have had hindsight over.
Yeah.
So forgive yourself a little bit.
I just want to add something about the Combahee River Collective.
You should give her the mic.
Sorry about that.
I just wanted to add something about the Combahee River Collective. Barbara Smith just donated like all her archives, like over 20 boxes of stuff to the Radcliffe Schlesinger Library. So all that stuff is there. Some of it's online, but you know, I don't know if you live in the area, you know, the Schlesinger Library is open to anybody. And also, there's a Black Women Radicals they have like an Instagram and a Facebook page, and they've been doing interviews with Barbara, Demita, and some of the other people involved with Combahee. So that's just a way to find out more.
Thank you so much. Is that another question?
You know, Rochelle and Annie, in the mid to late 60s into, I'm going to say mid 70s, you were part of not just a women's movement or not just a burgeoning queer liberation movement. There were still social movements well established and well underway, as well as political movements, and in particular, the anti-war movement. And it's not as if there wasn't strife and struggle around those issues, topics, people, and the leadership of the country, in particular with regard to the war in Vietnam. So fucked up. Really. But, Rochelle, when you talk about the consequences were on a much, it's not that there weren't any, but they were on a much lower heat than what's happening now with students on campuses who are raising hell about Gaza and Palestine. And I don't want to say like it was not all sweetness and light and peace and love. There was a lot of strife, but it was a very different time culturally, socially, and politically. And I just want to recognize the bigger context in which we were living and working at that time.
It might be worth mentioning, though, with the Black Panther Party, that people went in and killed Fred Hampton and killed other members of the Black Panther Party. And in that sense, the repression was extreme. And you could talk about Susan Sachs. I mean, you could talk about the repression of the lesbian community in this area as the FBI tried to track down Susan and other people who were part of the lesbian community. And also the Weather Underground. I mean, with the Vietnam War, there were people who felt that their protests were useless and took other means, and there was tremendous repression against them, although as white people, far less than the repression towards black people out of the civil rights movement and out of the Black Panther Party. So I don't know if... yeah, actually, I'm really glad that you mentioned all of that, because really when you think about what happened after World War II, there's this brief period of kumbaya, I suppose, and then there's the Red Scare, and which results really in major repression against radical labor unions, trans, which still has had repercussions to this very day. So yeah, I mean, it's one of the things we wanted to point out in the film, and maybe not enough, was that the history of this country is very much the history of social protest all the way through. Right before we took over 888, there had been student strikes. There, of course, was the fight for affordable housing. We found out from Sandra Graham that they had taken over the 1970 Harvard graduation. Or complain, you know, you want to talk about poor people, we're the poor people of your neighborhood. So yeah, I think we don't maybe emphasize enough. And for me, I remember the Rosenbergs. I remember growing up being with a horrible.
Some more context.
Oh, okay. I'm sorry. There was after World War II. There was a lot of. There was a brief period because we did fight with the Soviet Union to win the war against Nazism, and 27 million Soviets died in that fight. So basically, you could argue that the Red Army saved the world for democracy. But then, after that brief period, came the Cold War and came the campaigns, what was essentially Red Scare, campaigns against communists, which may have culminated, although it continued, with the execution of Julius and Ethel Rosenberg in 1953, which Roy Cohn, who was the mentor of our current president, bragged about the fact that he got Ethel Rosenberg to be executed along with Julius Rosenberg, that he insisted on that.
For being spies.
Sorry?
The context that they were spies, supposedly.
They were considered to be atomic spies, and they were both executed for giving secrets to the Soviet Union. And as a kid growing up in that time, I just remember the message to me was, you know, watch out what you do. Again, you know, the repression was all over the place, and we tend to kind of not emphasize that enough. And of course, there was horrible repression in the South around segregation and Jim Crow. And when we talk now about the repression that's going on now, it seems to me we forget that for 70 years there was Jim Crow repression in the South. This is nothing new, except now it's Jim Crow for just about everybody.
So I'd like to segue in at that with the, I wasn't alive during that period, obviously. I've watched a lot of this. No, it's wrong.
And if you want to pass it to the next person.
Oh, absolutely, yeah.
Should also be identified that if anybody's watched American, oh God, I forgot the play name again. But anyway, it's about Mormons. It should be recognized that the issue with the Rosenbergs and whatever his face is, I forgot his name, it was utilizing anti-Semitism yet again as a way to undermine social movements. So like Roy, whatever his name is, Roy Cohn, spit on his grave. He himself was Jewish, and they utilized his identity to further engage and accuse and execute other Jewish social movement workers. Do have a question or a statement? Question. In the spirit of Rainbow Coalition and Fred Hampton, what would you suggest us younger or not so young generations on how to organize movement as we are, you know, faced with the reality of our own Nazi regime?
Okay, so put it up to the floor. No, that gets opened up to the floor.
Yeah.
That's open to the floor.
Yeah. That, okay, there's somebody. Hi, yeah.
So I actually go to Emerson, and oh gosh, this is like a blur of memories, but I was at the Emerson encampment for Palestine. I don't even remember what year it was, like I blocked all of it out. But, our Student Justice for Palestine organization has been like completely suppressed, completely shut down. we actually had a protest not that long ago, like a couple of weeks ago, and they arrested more of our students. Like at the original sit-in, it wasn't a sit-in, it was an encampment, and it was in an alleyway between two of our school buildings, and they just decided randomly that Emerson no longer owns that alleyway, so police could come and arrest all of the students, and they didn't arrest 100 students, but it was a lot. Like, it was a majority of the students there, like many of my friends, and I was there. I escaped by like I don't know how, we were just all running. But since then, it's been so hard to organize anything for Student Justice for Palestine on campus because the school is like stalking their page and stalking all of the students who run the page. I had a few friends who were running it, and they all, like a few of them got fired from their RA positions, which meant they lost their scholarships and funding. They almost had their degrees revoked. So to organize anything and actually label it as an event that is fundraising for or like raising awareness for Palestine or any other sort of social movement because of the removal of DEI, we've sort of had to be like sneaky about it and like just find other organizations that aren't under target right now and sort of work with them to get funding. Like I run another organization called Flawless Brown, so sometimes I will like use our funding and like give it to them so they can get like food or like whatever they need to like have an event. So I think little things like that and like trying to find solidarity with other organizations that aren't necessarily your cause but will support you like financially is like a huge thing. And also just like finding investors, like it can be your parents, like literally anyone who will support your cause, who like wants to protect you and who has the ability to like give their house as a space to like have a community meeting. But yeah, just like any sort of in-person meeting that can't be like tracked by those forces that want to punish you is sort of like how we've been running anything. It's all just been like through personal means. But yeah, that's all I have to say. Sorry I talked so long.
Hi, I also go to Emerson. I was one of the RAs that got fired because of this. Hey! Emerson is a great place to be right now. Yeah, so I was just gonna say that I agree with everything you just said. Also, part of what we've been doing with SJP has just been coalition building with like everybody in Boston, not just student organizers. And it's been really, really hopeful to see how many people have been willing to show up for this because through all the repression, through all the fascism, through our school preemptively complying with the Trump administration, through like literally losing jobs and housing and access to food and like our friends getting charged with felonies, like it has been really, really hopeful to see that people will still keep going. And I think that speaks to like the perseverance that is evident in these communities because like organizers are going to keep going no matter what. And so even though it seems like really, really like hopeless right now and despairing, like everything that's going on is only pushing towards more momentum for this movement and for all liberation movements because it's all interlinked and intertwined. And I think that's like really important to say because it seems really hopeless right now, but we're still going.
Thank you.
Do you have any questions for general sharing things?
Not a question, but an invitation. A few of us here are involved in a project called the Old Dykes Affinity Group. And we were out at No Kings on the 18th. And a lot of people signed up on our contact list. And many people said to us, I don't quite know what to do. How did you come to be doing what you're doing? So on December 5th, I think it's going to be at 7 p.m. at Danny's downtown, Boylston, across from the old convention center. We're going to be doing a gathering. I don't know if I should even use the word training, but our what we're responding to is people coming to our table at No Kings and saying, wow, how did you do this? And teach me. So it's December 5th, I think at 7 at Danny's, and come and meet some more old dykes. Everyone.
Hi, this is a question. As a young lesbian who would love to get more involved in the community, and this is for everyone, does anyone have recommendations for more things like that, like kind of answering what you were just saying, in like lesbian social groups, socialists, etc., anywhere that you can get more involved in just more community type things like tonight? If anyone has any recommendations, I would love that. Thank you.
Fiber Arts.
Fiber Arts?
Yeah.
Just Fiber Arts groups?
Yeah, no, there's one at Arena next Monday, and then in 2 weeks at the Gaslight. It's supposed to be queer friendly, but you know, what do we queers do but complain?
Where's information?
What?
Where's the information? Hop on the.
On their website.
Thank you.
On the brewery's website.
This is a beautiful self-promotional moment, I think, also. I don't know, you may have found out about this event from Instagram, but the Instagram is kind of just a necessary little page. It's actually an email newsletter, Lesbos. Not everyone clicks on the link, but if you do, it'll take you to this monthly email that at the very top has like a list of all the different queer groups in Boston, and that's kind of growing, and if you ever don't see one on there that you know of, like, feel free to email. We'll add it on there, and then it's also a monthly events calendar. It's a Google Calendar, and it's not just nightlife. I'd say probably over like maybe like 80-85% of the stuff on there is like daytime, sober, either like crafting or sports, or there's also stuff with the different political organizations in the city, if there's something relevant on there in terms of like a gathering or like a skill share or a like protest, that'll be on there as well. And the goal kind of being that like if you wanted to start something or if there's something on there you don't see, hopefully making it less intimidating to organize that for yourself. I think it's really fun to get emails from people. I just spoke to someone yesterday who was like looking to start a group for lesbian moms in Boston, and that can be really intimidating, but the nice thing is that yeah, you can organize, and then when it's on the calendar and kind of just like promoted for free through the newsletter, I think it takes away the scary part, which is like the putting yourself out there, the like hanging flyers, having to start an Instagram account, like not the kind of stuff that you would want to have to do to just get people together in a room and to build more community. So if you had any more questions or anything more specifically that you're looking for, feel free to ask me. But yeah, just a plug to click on the email when you get it. There's a lot in there. Yeah. Does anyone else have any questions? Yeah.
Hi. So we've heard from a few students who are organizing. I used to work as a residence director at UMass. And one of the issues I kind of ran into at that job was trying to find a way to be an advocate on behalf of students who are organizing. Like, we had a pretty bad police reaction a few years ago, I think 2 years ago now, to our encampment. And I remember the meeting we as like Res Life, worked in Res Life, had about it opened with like a land acknowledgement and was like going super well, and then they talked about how to crack down harder on students, which is kind of like a weird, yeah, it's kind of like a weird dichotomy, right? So I was wondering, in the spirit of like intergenerational stuff, as young professionals get into higher positions of power, any recommendations you have for advocating on behalf of students or on behalf of young activists?
Yeah, I actually did wind up being an administrator. I was a director of the Russian school, of a Russian school. And I guess, I mean, I don't have any easy responses, but one of the things I found that was really, two things. One is it's absolutely essential to communicate, even with the people who you hate. even more so. The other thing was just to be very respectful to everybody. I mean, I was working at a military college, and you have to learn to be able to reach out, it seems to me, to people across the spectrum, which doesn't mean that you give up your principles in any way, but also try to get into those positions. I think that if you manage to get into a position with some power, you can make some changes. You can push against the norm or whatever it is, and at least for the time that you have that position. So in other words, don't shy away from, if you're given that responsibility, taking it. I mean, I don't know that that's...
No, that makes a lot of sense. And a great question, great thought of the now versus later. I think that's gonna wrap up the official Q&A, but people are welcome to kind of chat. I urge anyone to kind of exchange contact info if anyone brought up anything that sounded interesting or if you met a new friend. But Rochelle's also gonna share a poem to kind of close us out, is that?
Yeah, it's just a quick one. So I've actually periodically set my poems to sort of music or taken songs, and so one of them is, you better not shout, you better not cry, you better not pout, I'm telling you why, Santifa is coming to town.
That's awesome. Thank you, Rochelle, and thank you so much, Annie. Rochelle also has her resistance poetry available just yonder with Estelle. Give it a wave. Hi. If you would interest in perusing or purchasing them. We had a whole dress rehearsal. It was all staged. I also wanted to give a huge shout out to Cafe Zing and to Nikki for having us here. They could not be more gracious and accommodating hosts. So make sure if you haven't grabbed a little drink for the road, or if they still have some of those bagels out or whatever, or just next time in your neighborhood, come and swing by Cafe Zing. It's such a great spot. I'll be hanging around. Let me know if you have any questions. Thank you guys so much for coming out tonight and for staying late. It's been great to chat and great to have everyone in a room like this. So thank you so much.
Thank you.